is our young men are hungry for a place to be seen, heard, and understood. There's an old African proverb that says, if we don't initiate the young men, they will burn down the village just to feel the fire, to feel the heat, to feel the challenge. As a male educator at your school site, it can get lonely. Only 23% of K-12 educators in America are male. And just think about what this gender gap means for your male students. They experience disproportionate levels of discipline. This is a show for male educators who want to feel more understood by their community and want to create emotionally safe classrooms and schools for the next generation of male students. Welcome to Unmasking with Male Educators. Hey, what's up, folks? Welcome to Talking with Male Educators. Today, I am reflecting on my conversation from episode 14 with Jordan Bowman. Jordan in our conversation talked about lots of really important topics of the work with young men in our work as mentors, as educators. Him as a young man who went through his own rites of passage as a teen and then became the director of the organization that he also participated in. The journey of Ever Forward and how we started with young men in high school, creating a in-school kind of rite of passage experience. But we weren't really calling it a rite of passage when we started. So I encourage you to go back and listen to episode 14 to get context around what this topic is about. And maybe you already have some experience or some connection to rite of passage. Maybe you went through your own type of rite of passage. I think if I think about United States, where I was born in the 70s, right? My teenage years was the late 80s, 90s, right? I think that one thing that I want us to talk about in this episode, I want to reflect on is where rites of passage is today. What is your knowledge of rites of passage? What are the things that are happening out there in the world? And where do young people get a rite? Get something in their community that connects them to a rite of passage. Now, before I even can jump into rite of passage, let me tell you a definition of rite of passage. And I think that will help us to make sure that we're talking about the same things, because in many communities, if you're a teenager, definitely here in the US, if you're a teenager, there are certain milestones that help you know that you went from being a boy to being a man, or being, a young person to being an adult. Rite of passage is defined as a ceremony or event marking an important stage in someone's life, especially birth, puberty, marriage, and death. Those markers of adulthood. Now, birth, puberty, marriage, death. Now, every culture is different and every culture has different markers that help those things, Like, I think that as my journeys around the world, I've had opportunities to experience and learn from different people who have navigated rites of passage very differently. Historically, depending on the cultures that you have researched, you've heard of stories of tribulations and trials that a young person has to go through, a boy has to go through to become a man. With women, and I don't have personal experience, but there are biological things that helps to identify when a girl has become a woman. There are some biological things that happen. I don't know why I feel like I'm having a hard time saying this word, like menstruation, like the period, like a girl will have her period. I don't know. I feel shy about saying that word. It's just something, not words I usually talk about, right? But as a girl growing to becoming a woman, when she has her first period, it's an identifier that she can now produce life. Now, for a boy, what would that be? Would that be a wet dream? Because that happens unplanned and just natural, like that may with some boys, but some boys are older and may never have one. What we know is that many cultures have created opportunities for boys to demonstrate through some type of conquest, some type of proving that you are now ready to be honored alongside the other men. Now, depending on your cultural sensitivity or your cultural understanding, you may look at some of these rituals and be like, that's not okay. That's unacceptable. And we're not here to discuss the safety or any of that in rites of passage. But what we are here to discuss is the fact that rites of passage was designed for a very specific and very important reason. How does a young person now at a certain time get honored that they are now an adult? Now, some of those things, someone asked me, what would you tell a teacher if you were trying to describe to them rites of passage? What would you tell a teacher rites of passage is? You know, we invite young people to a modern day rites of passage through an organization called the Young Men's Ultimate Weekend. I participated in events that are put on by an organization called Boys to Men. I've gone through adult types of rites of passage events, or you can call them men's weekends. But for men who've never gone through rites of passage, your first men's weekend almost feels like you're going through an ordeal. They have different opportunities and challenges that push your limits of like, who are you? Where are you going? What are you doing with this life you have? How are you making the most out of it? Are you being the best that you can be? Now, you're going to hear me talk a lot in this conversation about men and boys because that is the topic, as the focus. But it's not to mean that there are not other opportunities out there for girls and women and all those who may not identify in the binaries to have their own processes. But my focus is going to be about boys and men, boys becoming men. The transition from a little boy to then saying, now I'm a man. Now, in the Western world, we are full of adolescence. We are full of a lot of young people that are between that age of 12, 13 to 18, 19. I mean, every young person is different based on some biological things and some when their puberty starts. But you can imagine that there's a lot of adolescence. Young man, young woman, young person. That wasn't always the case. There was a time where you are a boy, little boy, and then you go through a rites of passage that then takes you into becoming a man. There's no hanging on time where you just get to eat up all the food of the community. And then one day there's like, oh, right on. You now have hit this marker. Now, many communities, if you get your license, that's considered like a part of rites of passage. If you go to graduate high school, maybe you have sex. Maybe you are, there's some other things in your community that they do. Maybe you have a bar mitzvah, maybe for different cultures and communities. Maybe you have some kind of communion, your first communion, or whatever that may be for your cultural relevance or connection. You may understand, okay, I did this thing and then I felt like a man. I had this experience and then I got my license. I got a car. I got to go when I wanted, came back when I wanted. I got my first job. What are those things in your own life and your own community that help young people understand rites of passage? Now, the question I was asked about telling a teacher, like, what would you describe it to a teacher who had never heard of it, about what rites of passage is? And I try to describe it in this way. I tried to say it like this. Let me try and explain it again. There is biological changes that are going to happen as the days of the calendar pass. You are going to get older biologically, like numerically. You're going to grow. Your body's going to change and develop through puberty. But it doesn't mean that the community has honored you and respects you as a man, as an adult. It can happen in your own home. You can be 18 years old, 19 years old, but still get treated like a little kid because the family has decided that you have not yet demonstrated or you have not yet done what they need to see in their eyes that then can call you a full adult. So you may still get treated like a little kid. You may allow it to happen even, but maybe yet that is not what you would call I have arrived at adulthood if none of the other adults acknowledge me as an adult. Now, you also have situations where if I am in a community where none of the other adults in the community honor me as an adult, have I become an adult? Or in my own mind, I am. I'm 18. I just finished high school. I'm an adult now. But some people would say, no, you're still not. You haven't yet done anything. Somebody's still taking care of you. Somebody's still paying for your bills. Somebody's still feeding you, washing your clothes. Like somebody's still caring for all of your needs. You have not yet shown that you can be responsible for yourself. Now, whether that's a marker that you agree with or not, it doesn't matter. But the question is, when do I get to honor the fact that I have now become a man? When we do workshops in schools and I ask young men, how many of you are already operating in the world like a man? I have definitely dozens of young men who will raise their hand. Now, maybe some of them are not, but maybe many of them are. But either way, if they in their mind are calling themselves a man, then our responsibility is to help them see or ask them the right questions to understand what is their definition. Because a young man who tells me that he's operating in the world as a man, but yet he doesn't show up to school on time, we should have a question about that. What are your values about being a man? What are your levels of responsibility about being a man? If we have a young man who says, I'm a man, but he doesn't tell the truth, we have to have a conversation with him, not questioning him, but also questioning him. It's like, hey, what do you mean by that? You told me that you were here, but I heard that you were actually there. Why didn't you just tell me the truth? And I think helping them understand that how we hold ourselves, how we are seen by others. Am I a person of my word? I have a godson in Mexico, and 2 weeks ago, he was supposed to call me, right? It was his mom's birthday, and he was supposed to get, my vision was that he was going to get her a gift, that we had like a subliminal conversation about him making sure he did something for her. And I said, hey, I want you to give me a call and let me know, right? And he said, okay, I'll call you. And then the 1 week went, he didn't call me, and I texted in again, maybe he forgot. Checked in again. We were supposed to have a conversation. He then called me on his mom's phone. But I was in the middle of an event, so I couldn't talk. And I said, well, hey, give me a shout back. In my mind, in his mind, I told him I was going to call him back. So when we finally talked, I said, okay, look, I was waiting for your call for 2 weeks. And he said, oh, I did call you, but you weren't available to talk. And so we had this discussion. I said, oh, yeah, you're right. I said, but I thought you were going to call me back because I was at an event. He's like, oh, no, I thought you were going to call me. And so at that moment, he and I got to have a discussion. I wasn't mad with him. I was really just saying, hey, we made a commitment. You had a conversation. And what we got to do in that moment is say, oh, okay, I'm understood differently than what was going to happen after you did call me back, because you did call me back. And so how many times do we get a chance to have people help us? Now, if you're a young man who didn't grow, if you were a man now who didn't grow up with a father in the home, maybe your connection to holding your word or whatever was challenged by other people in the community. Maybe you didn't have a uncle or somebody who said, hey, tell me about your integrity. Tell me about your word. And so all the things that we talk about with rites of passage, what we are doing today more than ever is our young men are hungry for a place to be seen, heard, and understood. There's an old African proverb that says, if we don't initiate the young men, they will burn down the village just to feel the fire, to feel the heat, to feel the challenge. And we don't want our young men burning down the villages. We can see in our communities, you can watch the news, whatever your news channels are, you can see that young men are navigating a world that is complex for them. And we have to give them tools so that they can then become adults who are not only operating out of their emotion, but they know how to operate out of a place of like, I have processed my emotion. Here's the stimulus that made me feel this thing. Here's how I'm going to process that and how I'm going to respond. There's a young man who I know is reading Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. And that book is one of the phrases that I really enjoy powerfully. This idea of between the stimulus and the response, there's a space. And if I'm not clear that I know the space between when something happens to me, somebody did something, I'm feeling some rage popping in. What am I upset about? Oh, do I feel disrespected? Am I embarrassed? What is the emotion that's connected in there? Now, I graduated high school at 17 years old. I went off to college and I was living on my own. I raised the highest number of scholarships than any other student from Fremont High School in Oakland. Somebody has beaten that record since then, of course. But at the time, I had applied for over 100 scholarships. I had gotten, I don't even remember the numbers anymore, but thousands and thousands of dollars of scholarships. So when I left home, I didn't leave home constantly checking in at home whether they were going to send me allowance. I had my own money, my own bank account. I was operating as an adult. Now, still, so many parts of my life were still not developed in many ways. I was still trying to figure it out, but I knew that at least that part, no one could tell me when to come home. No one could tell me when to wake up. It was my responsibility to take care of myself. I paid for my own dorm room. outside of any other scholarships, I paid for my own tuition. I went down to the registrars. I got money gave money back. All the ways that I was responsible for myself. Now, why am I naming that? Well, because maybe that's what was your way of thinking of what made you a man. When we think about rites of passage, like if around you are not yet honored, then maybe you have to then redefine what it means for yourself. Now, let me go to a different place because I want to make sure that of the topics that we're going to talk about around rites of passage, there are different ways of doing it. Now, in older days, and you can do some research on rites of passage, you will see many different types of ceremonies that were created for young people to make that transition. The boys in many villages and many communities, and I'll speak about some of the African traditions that I've researched and I've learned, many of them, the men, the elders would come to the village, meaning they lived there, but they would be where the men spend time. And every season, whatever that season was for rites of passage, the elders would come and take all the boys that were of the right age. And then they would take those boys through a process. Now, you can do a lot of research on different types of processes that went through, but those boys were, when they were finished, when they completed the task that they were given to do by the elders, they were then honored in that village as men. And whether there were 12, whether they were 13, whether they were 14, depending on the right time for each young man, it wasn't one size fits all. When that boy became ready, he then moved into the circle of men. Now, modern day, if I think about a lot of the rites of passage events that I have been to and that I have been a part of, I am excited about the next season of this work. Since 2009, we've taken young people to a couple of different youth rites of passage events. We've taken them to Young Men's Ultimate Weekend, which is our primary Bay Area connection source to modern day rites of passage. Those weekends are filled of teamwork, community building, conversation, reflection, opportunities for young men to grow, to develop, to ask themselves hard questions about how am I seeing the world? What am I responsible for? Am I being honorable, responsible, having integrity, or am I still operating like a little boy? So when we leave that weekend, we call those young men, all of them that complete their process, we say, you are now welcome into the circle of men. But many of them still aren't old enough to even be responsible for themselves, but they are now understanding that it is more than just age. It is more than just biology. It's more than just, oh, I'm a man now. And listen, I've been saying that since I was 7 years old. You know what I'm saying? I was told I was the man of the house. So I owned that title early on. So I told you many of the stories of a teacher in middle school telling me you can't go to the bathroom. And I'm like, what are you talking about? What are you talking about? I can't go to the bathroom. I only asked you because all these other little boys in this class ask you, I'm going. And then my silly self walk out of class getting in trouble with my mom because she's like, how you dare you gonna walk out of a class? I said, I had to use the restroom. The person told me I couldn't go. I'm a man. She can't tell a man he can't go to the bathroom. Are you crazy? Now, obviously, I used that statement too many times with my mom before I realized that it's not a healthy thing to do. But I did use it as a context of like, how can you as a person, I asked you because all these other little kids in this classroom ask you, that I'm not a little kid, but I'm going to try and at least follow along with the way they're doing it. And then when I am honoring myself as a man, when I'm taking my sovereign responsibility to say, I'm going to do this thing, now, was I paying my own bills? No. Was I paying for my own food? No. But I was given other responsibilities in my home that told me that I was a man. So it's sometimes confusing, especially if you're the man of the house. If you're the oldest male in the house, you may have been told, or I was told, you're the man of the house. So I'm like, hey, sign me up for that. I didn't always knew what it meant. I definitely didn't always feel like I was a man or an adult. Definitely didn't feel like an adult. But I was like, hey, there ain't no other man here. I'm taking care of the things that are asking me to take care of. I'm protecting my sister, making sure she gets to school, taking care of my brother. Like I'm doing the things that I'm asked to do. So that's the title I was given. And some of those titles that we provide young men before they're ready, sometimes we're calling 5-year-olds, look at big man over there. Hey, I think it's a cute way of describing him. Look at that big man over there. And then we confuse when he's 7 years old and he's crying because we're like, you're supposed to be a man. And you're like, I'm 7. You know what I mean? And so sometimes we use those words to bring people up to a level of expectation. But if we haven't provided them the scaffolding and the tools and be able to navigate all the aspects of that word, then we sometimes shame them for not being what we expected them to be. Those are some of the elements that we have to do with rites of passage. So when Jordan Bowman and I had our conversation in episode 14, he and I talked about the weekend that I went to experience with him in North Carolina in a beautiful outdoor venue. It was the fall season. I guess it was like maybe coming towards winter. The leaves were turning colors. I mean, I saw colors of leaves that I had never seen before in my life. I mean, like purple and colors of green and orange that I'm like, what am I looking at here? Like it was amazing. Right? I had never been to North Carolina before. So not only was I having a new experience, I was also having a first time participating in the Journeymen Triangle Rites of Passage weekend. And man, it was beautiful. You know, the work that we did to set up the weekend, the work that we did, the men the night before to do our own healing work. Because when young men come, the men have to be ready. It has to not be about me and what I need. It has to be about the young men that are coming through to go through their own process. And I can tell you many of experiences I've been through where young men will test the men who in the space. They'll test you verbally. They'll test you with how they stare you down. They'll test you with how they use their own understanding of who they are and what they've been called in the world. So they've been already called a man. When you tell them, hey, no, you can't do that right now, they can get offended. They can get frustrated, upset. They can even act out in ways that are against the space. But our opportunity for just helping them recognize that there's a journey, there's a level of responsibility that goes with this title of becoming from boyhood to manhood. And many of them have already been operating as men in their lives. Now, listen, we could talk forever. I could talk forever about rites of passage because I think it's a powerful thing. I did not have a rites of passage growing up. I mean, I went through a lot of challenging situations growing up that I can look back and say, oh, that was a moment. When we think about the definition of rites of passage, I'll read it again. It says a ceremony or event marking an important stage in someone's life. A ceremony or event marking an important stage in someone's life. I can look back to many moments of growing up where that moment and that moment and that event were huge markers in the transition and growing of my life. And today, as I try and do this work, as we try and grow this movement of helping young people navigate the emotional masks they wear, talking to men around the world, educators, teachers, coaches, of how they are using what they learned growing up to then help others, whether they learned it when they were a teen or they learned it when they were an adult, what that journey of making it to adulthood has taught them and how they can take those lessons and give back to others. So listen, there are a lot of resources out there about rites of passage. I encourage you to do some homework about it. I'll tell you about 3 resources that maybe 4 resources that are coming up. There's going to be a rites of passage summit coming up in October. I'll be providing more information about that. I will be there. I'll probably be presenting. I'm definitely helping with some of the organizational. So there will be a rites of passage summit that's coming up. I want to say in October. I don't think I have the dates. I can find the dates for you fast. So I will have that next time. You will hear more about it for sure. We have, if you go to mentoring.org, you will find a place where you can find a mentor. You can do a search, find a mentor. If you're looking for a mentor for your son, nephew, cousin, a young man in your life, you can just search by geographic area. Maybe there's some mentors in that area. Maybe there's some programs in that area. If you're looking for a rites of passage experience for your young person, I encourage you to go to Youth Passageways. Now, their website, the organization is called Youth Passageways. Let me make sure I give you the right, youthpassageways.org, youthpassageways.org. And you can go there and learn more about, you just put in your zip code and they will share with you any organizations that are in their network that are doing rites of passage work. Do the homework. Check it out. Check out the organizations that are doing the work. Contact them, reach out to them, email them, go to their channels on social media and see, does it align with the values that you and your family have for your young men? I encourage you to do that. It's so important. So amongst all the resources out there in the world that you could look at, I'm only sharing with you a few of them. One last one I'd like to share is a short film by Frederick Marks from Warrior Films. It's a Warrior Films Rites of Passage press kit. So you can go and just search on Google that. It's an amazing short film talking about the journey of rites of passage. I encourage you to just go and do some of your own homework. As you're trying to figure out what is it you want to support your young person to do in this next chapter of their life, whether they're at the age where you're already seeing them ready to like live into an adulthood that they're not really ready for, begin providing the tools for them. Begin asking them, what do they want to demonstrate as an adult in the world, and begin helping them find those tools. Begin the process now. I don't know what age of the young people we're talking about in your circle, but I know in our work, we're constantly asking young men, who are you trying to be? What are your goals? What are your values? And continually asking them questions about how their daily activity, how their actions, how their behavior, how their words are showing up in their actions. And so, listen, rites of passage I could talk about forever, but with this short conversation, I hope it has inspired you to begin thinking about how you define rites of passage. If you are raising a son, I encourage you to begin the process of thinking, what are the ways in which we can prepare this boy to move into manhood in a healthy, safe, and a way that doesn't require him to go out and figure out how to do something dangerous to prove that he's a man to people around them, where he has already proved it and developed a plan with his family. Therefore, anybody out there in the world who tells him, here's what you have to do to prove you're a man, he will already know. And guess what? We could go in deeper about what we are seeing out in the world of people asking and telling boys they should be doing to prove they're real men. And many of you probably wouldn't agree with many of the things you're seeing out there. So you can begin that process. And I think that that's where we're going to end today's show. Thank you for being a part of this episode. Listen, I hope you will go back and listen to my episode with Jordan Bowman. Listen, that episode had a wealth of information. And it's also the next thing we're going to talk about. I'm going to do another reflection about my conversation with Jordan, because he talked about the biopsychosocial, spiritual framework. Like, if you are thinking like, what is the process of which my development is happening? My child, my young people, the students I work with, my community, myself. I don't want to start opening the window for what that's about, but that will be in a future episode, because it is a topic that I'm really interested in and it requires some nuance. So I want to have some time to process that with you. So go back and listen to episode 14. You can hear Jordan speaking about that himself. And I look forward to you being a part of the journey with us. Listen, give you 2 heads up. We have our dance-a-thon coming up May 24th, 2025. We invite you to be a part of the journey with us if you're here in the Bay Area. If you're not in the Bay Area, what we ask you to do is share it with somebody. You can contribute to the event. You can also help us by getting the word out to people that you know who are local to the Bay Area. And if you're not able to be at that event, please make sure you're preparing for November, our Young Men's Conference. It will be the second one, but it will be bigger and more amazing than ever. So we would love to invite you to come here, wherever you're from, to the Bay Area, to bring your son to that event. But nonetheless, I'm saying like your son, like you all have sons, but to the young men and the young people in your community. And we look forward to that event being an event that is absolutely phenomenal for young people, young men in our community. So thank you so much. We'll see you next time. Thank you for being a part of today's episode. We'll see you soon. Bye now. Cheers.